Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. The Los Angeles Clippers, don't forget about them because they are very talented roster. I've seen people come out and say, they got one of the best rosters when they're healthy, and honestly, there's definitely an argument there for it. Keep in mind, Kawhi missed all last season. Paul George played in 31 games. Got John Wall. Retained Batum, you retained Covington, you retained Zubac, you retained Amir Coffey. I think that they're not that young. They do have some nice young talent. They're kind of money, dude. They're actually kind of money. And I think when you really put things in perspective, you really take a step back. You're like, all right, you know what? Kawhi missed the whole season. Paul George played 31 games. You can't count them out this fast. You just can't count them out. I don't know if counting out, actually, I don't think counting out's the right word. I think it's more about, honestly, just forgetting. I think just forgetting. I fell victim to this as well. When they got John Wall and you kind of look into the Clippers a little bit more, it's like, yeah. It's like, hell yeah. And I don't think a good offseason always has to be flashy. It doesn't ever have to be all that flashy unless your team needs it. You need those stars. But from the Clippers standpoint, I mean, you look at their offseason, you got to give them somewhere in the A range. I would put them probably at an A minus. You could make an argument of an A. You could make an argument of a B plus. But I think if we're being real here, an A minus offseason grade. Yeah, they really only got John Wall. But John Wall offers this team a lot. Now you have two really good point guards, Reggie Jackson and John Wall, who know what they're doing. They have that veteran experience. They have that veteran expertise. They're good leaders. And I think John Wall, whether he's coming off the bench, whether he's starting, same thing goes for Reggie Jackson. This is a very talented team. Personally, I'm a Rockets guy, so I do think that John Wall will start. And I think John Wall, just 2 years off of 20-7, had a whole year that he took off. John Wall still got plenty of gas in the tank, man. He's got plenty of gas in the tank. I know guys like Nicholas Batum, Rocco, especially at this point in his career, I guess both of those two cats are getting a little bit older. This isn't 2K14 anymore, unfortunately. Zubac might not always be the flashiest player, and same thing goes with Coffey. He's kind of nice. Or I don't mean it like that. He's a nice young piece that they have. Don't mean to disrespect Amir Coffey. My point being is this. It's not the flashiest of teams because, first off, Kawhi Leonard is like the definition of unflashy. And Paul George, at this point in his career, extremely humble guy as well. I don't think he was ever cocky or not humble, but they're just a low-key team. So here we have, and I'm on Real GM, and they don't really have the best depth charts that are updated. I mean, I'm looking at their starters right now. It's going Reggie, Paul George, Batum, Marcus Morris, and Zubac. They have... Actually, Kawhi Leonard is limited playing time. I mean, I feel like that kind of goes without saying, but you have a bunch of talented players. Marcus Morris as well. We talked about Batum. We talked about Coffey. We talked about Covington. Terrence Mann, Norman Powell, these are going to be two critical players. I don't think that the bench is something you can't forget about. I don't think you can forget about the bench. I guess that's kind of on the obvious side, but a good bench goes a long way. I think back to I remember watching those Warriors. I feel like an old head right now. I'm talking about 6 freaking years ago. When the Warriors were initially making their run with their big three, they had such a deep bench. I mean, I don't think, it reminds me almost of the Clippers, where it's just not, you got guys like Sean Livingston, Leandro Barbosa, these aren't flashy basketball players by any means. But they're so freaking good at doing their job, doing their role. And when I view I know I'm comparing the Clippers to the freaking Warriors. It's a loose comparison, but hopefully you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying, where you have a bunch of guys who, they have these roles that they just excel in. Like I said, Robert Covington, Nicholas Batum, 2 possible bench players this upcoming season. Even throwing Morris, throwing Zubac into that. These guys aren't the flashiest of players, but that's what this league is kind of built on. I mean, I guess maybe I guess maybe those aren't, you can nitpick that statement. But once again, man, hopefully you just kind of get the gist of what I mean here. It's not rocket science, though. People know, once you remind people like, oh, shoot, Kawhi Leonard's on that team. Paul George is on that team. I don't think people really realize just what we're talking about, though. I look at Paul George right now. I'm actually going to double check Kawhi right here, but I look at Paul George stats, 24 points per game, and, you know, I like to reminisce. I remember Indiana Pacers, like especially in 2K. I can't believe I've mentioned 2K this many times, but you go back and you look at, you know, Pacers, Paul George. I think of like Danny Granger, Roy Hibbert. I think of all the OGs on that Pacers squad. And I feel like some people get under the impression, myself included at times, that Paul George kind of peaked there. It's the furthest thing from the truth. Paul George has only gotten better since he left Indiana. Oklahoma City Thunder, very good. Right now on the Clippers, when he's playing and when he's healthy. And by the way, I don't have health issues with Paul George. I feel like a lot of this, I mean, this past season, there was a lot of maintenance involved, and that's what you got to do, especially where the Clippers kind of were standing right now. Kawhi Leonard not coming back. You don't want to rush either of those two players. You got to remember these guys are just barely over the age of 30, and they are in their prime right now. You're witnessing Paul George, a 24-point per game, doing everything Paul George. You're witnessing the same thing from Kawhi. We're 1 year removed from Kawhi Leonard going 25 points per game, 6.5 rebounds, 5.2, almost 2 steals per game, 40% three-point shooter. Like, these guys are maturing like fine wines, but it's just going fully below the radar because this past season specifically, they just didn't play. They weren't healthy. So I take a step back. I'm like, man, you got two superstars on your team. And then you have just these very nice complementary pieces to these complementary assets like Reggie Jackson, Zubac, Marcus Morris, Batum, Robert Covington, new addition Norman Powell, prototypical 3-and-D player, but he's more than just a 3-and-D player. Luke Kennard off of the bench. You have young guys like Brandon Boston Jr. and Terrence Mann. You just signed Moses Brown. I think Moses Brown is a very nice signing. I think Hartenstein is good in his own regards, but you got to keep in mind, man, I view Moses Brown more as a depth signing because from what I've seen of the Clippers, what I'm thinking the Clippers are going to be doing, especially once we get towards the playoffs, once we start getting in clutch time in these playoff games or in these late season games, they're going to go small. That's where they thrive. They thrive small. They're so interchangeable on offense and defense that so many of these guys can play different positions. They can do different things. They can guard different players. They're just multifaceted. And so I think you got to remind yourself. I'm not saying the Clippers are necessarily underrated because once you come to this realization, like, oh, shoot, you're right. These guys are really good. They're really freaking good. So I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. Hopefully this video hits Clipper Nation. And as always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for daily NBA content. If you want more Clippers videos, I got you guys. Go ahead, drop a comment, or just show this video some love with that like button. Let's try and hit maybe 50 likes on today's video. I'll catch you cats later.